I'm Dr. Nate Bosch, the director of the Lilly Center for Lakes and Streams. Our word of the day today is eutrophication. Hard to say, even harder to spell, but it's a pretty simple concept. Let's use an analogy of our own human body to help us understand this. So just like our bodies age over time due to what we feed it, how we treat it, and then just time passing, so too our lakes age over time as well. They don't get wrinkles or gray hair, but there are certain signs that we can tell a lake is getting older. The general progression of a lake would be starting as a lagotrophic. You could think of that as sort of childhood, and then mesotrophic, maybe adolescence, and then eutrophic, maybe adulthood, to pull our human analogy a little bit further. So how's the lake going to change throughout those particular times? Well, our lakes here in northern Indiana are what are called glacial lakes. So they're formed by glaciers. And so right after they're formed, they're going to be considered alagotrophic. Some of the characteristics we'd see in an alagotrophic lake would be super clear water, not a whole lot of vegetation, deep bottom, not a lot of muck or sediment that started to accumulate on the bottom of the lake, few fish species, not all that diverse in its aquatic community. And you're going to notice different types of plants around the shoreline and even in the lake as well. We might have plants such as bladderwort in the water. Bladderwort's actually really cool. It's a carnivorous plant, just like Venus flytrap or a pitcher plant. They have these tiny little deflated sacs, and when a zooplankton goes up near it and triggers a couple hairs at one time, it opens up, pulls in the zooplankton, and then the bladderwort starts to digest the zooplankton. But that's kind of a little bit of a rabbit trail. When we move into the second phase of lakes as they age, we move into the mesotrophic lake category. Mesotrophic is probably what 80% or more of our lakes in Kosciuszko County, Indiana, and probably across the entire Midwestern United States. They would be in this category. We're starting to get a little bit more nutrients in the water, and so our water is starting to get a little bit greener in color, maybe a little bit browner, depending on what types of algae are in the water at that time. Those nutrients are feeding the algae, which makes the water look a little cloudier. We're also going to get more plant material starting to grow. Those bladderworts might be replaced with some of the things I have around me here in this lake, like pondweed or lilies. The fish are going to change. We're going to have more diversity in the fish community. With more nutrients, it's going to ramp up that food chain, and so we're going to have different types of fish that we're going to see in the lake. Also, the vegetation along the shoreline might change as well. The lake's actually going to get shallower as we go from alagotrophic to mesotrophic. We're going to start to get a little bit more of that sediment, that muck starting to build on the bottom of the lake, and so it's going to make the lake a little bit shallower than over time as well. And then we move to our final lake stage, which is eutrophic, which is where we get the word eutrophication. That's the process that we're moving in. And a eutrophic lake's going to be even shallower. Really, that lake's on its way to becoming a wetland, and then even a wet prairie, and then a dry prairie as it continues to fill in over time. And so we've got lots of muck, sediment build up on the bottom of the lake. It's fairly shallow. Now we've got plants moving in and almost choking out the water column. There's so many plants. The water color typically is going to be an even less clarity, with more of those greens and browns from all of the algal abundance, because we've got lots of nutrients in that lake as it moves into the later stages of its life. We've got plants. We're no longer going to see some of those original plants like the bladderworts. We're only going to see some of these other plants like lilies, which are an indicator of moving into that lake later, what we call trophic status, that eutrophic type lake. So what are some examples of lakes that are in those different categories? Well, here in Kosciuszko County in northern Indiana, we're standing in Pike Lake right now, which is an example of a eutrophic lake. And so we've got a high level of productivity here, lots of nutrients, we've got lots of plants, high fish productivity, and we're starting to see the lake fill in then with that muck. Example of mesotrophic lake, those would be lakes like Lake Wawasee in our county, but the largest natural lake in Indiana. Also, Big Chapman would be an example in that mesotrophic. Actually, most of our lakes in Kosciuszko County would be in the mesotrophic category. And then oligotrophic, that original sort of childhood, if you will, category, that would be more like Waubee up in the northern part of Kosciuszko County, or even Shock Lake, kind of in the more middle part of our county. And so how long does this take? Some of you might be living on a lake thinking, oh man, is my lake going to be filled in next year and become a wetland? It takes a long time, naturally, for this progression to happen. But we as people around the lakes and in the watersheds even further from the lakes can actually speed up that process. It's called cultural eutrophication. So there's the natural process of eutrophication, but we can speed it up. And what are some things that we can do to speed it up? Well, too much nutrients getting in the lake is really the cause. And so where are those nutrients coming from? Fertilizers. Excess fertilizers. When we put too much fertilizer in a golf course or a lawn, around our homes or an agricultural field, that excess nutrient is going to come into the lake and speed up this eutrophication process. Also, we can have erosion. Erosion maybe from the lake itself, the shorelines of the lake itself, maybe from the bottom of the lake with certain boating activities. It could be from construction sites around a watershed, agricultural fields, stream bank erosion along our streams that lead into our lakes. Those are going to be things that can bring additional nutrients into the lake as well. We can actually reverse eutrophication. So there's such a thing as oligotrophication, which is moving it backwards in time. Our closest example to that here in the Midwestern United States would be Lake Michigan. I can remember as a kid going in Lake Michigan and standing in water that's maybe waist or knee deep and not being able to see my toes under the water. Now, as an adult, even though I'm taller, I can actually see my toes in the water in Lake Michigan. So Lake Michigan has gone backwards in that aging process, and that's a goal that we have for lots of our inland lakes here through Indiana and throughout the Midwest. That's what we're working towards at the Lilly Center, for example. All right, so eutrophication, that natural progression that can sometimes be sped up if we're not careful with how we take care of our local lakes as we go from oligotrophic to mesotrophic to eutrophic.